When you look back on movies like the Avengers, you see something that laid the foundation of the modern cinematic shared universe, where groups of heroes of separate stories all came together to share an even bigger one. It was a great formula that proved that there can be more than one necessary person to get a job done over a period of time. But the main part of something like the Avengers is the broader enemy forces that they introduce, like Thanos himself being one of the main comic villains of the team that they were building towards. Every major movie in some way was meant to feature him on the materials connected to reaching that point, contrasted with the worries of those like Tony Stark ever since he sent a bomb towards an alien army. And that's what a movie like Infinity War was for, the culmination of these smaller puzzle pieces assembling together for the actual confrontation. Not the final one, of course, as that is saved for the next movie, where this one is more of a movie for the villain that we've seen in the shadows or on his side. Where today, Infinity War stands to be a triumph of proper build-up and how you present an actual threat right when you spend so much time with groups of heroes either individually or together, and the consequences of their faults if they are not united in certain causes. We're looking back on this movie today, we see something that was perfect in its execution and its main goals. The first major Marvel film to cross the $2 billion threshold like so many few others have done, namely Avatar, Star Wars, and Titanic at that certain point in time, where regardless if people watch previous films or not, many people pay close attention to this film for what would have been the biggest cultural event in the modern century, or second one since they knew that the second part would be released a year later. But doing something like Infinity War and then Endgame put into perspective of what kind of film this really was. Where before that point you just had one and done films of the Avengers and Age of Ultron that had the big bads who were defeated at the very end, where this one had one who was in the background of every single one of them, mostly an end credits feature where the main stories came across the Infinity Stones, where Infinity War is the culmination of that entire saga where they fight to either capture them or prevent them from being captured. That it is mostly a villain film, in the essence that Thanos is the true main character of this adventure that everyone is focusing on, and it's mostly about his own journey to fight for what he believes in, and the Avengers being a roadblock in preventing him from doing so. And that's a great reason why I prefer this over Endgame, for the fact that the heroes simply lose at the end, which is something that rarely happens in any movie, let alone a superhero one, and is a more complete narrative as we do focus on characters like Thanos who will become less of an issue as they did battle an alternate timeline version in Endgame, who served more as a threat preventing the heroes from undoing what Thanos did. Basically a reverse situation of what happens here and there, where you see two sides of a coin accomplish what they believe in. And the hero's main job for the most part in films like this is to rush to stop what's going to eventually happen, which they fail at. And that's due to all the bad events that happened in the world previously, like in Captain America Civil War where they were torn apart over the Sokovia Accords, and how some went on their own adventures in space like in Thor Ragnarok, needing eventual help from the Guardians of the Galaxy who grew as a team in that very time. Where the effective thing that this film does is already having a unified villain who knows what he wants against a fractured heroes going from place to stop him without a concrete plan, making it up as they go along. It's something they really deserve, to be honest, where they needed to be humbled because of their indifference to act, the bitter arguments against the laws of man when the right choices needed to be done in the name of the Avengers. And as I've mentioned before, the reason they're called the Avengers relates to a line that Tony Stark said to Loki, meaning if they cannot protect the Earth, they will avenge it, meaning people will die like Phil Coulson and they will not manage to save everyone regardless of what happens, which was the main point of the Sokovia Accords, to just manage their vigilante ways because they cause destruction regardless of saving the day. Where if you put all of that into perspective going into a film like this, you can see why they fail, because they are not Avengers in this film, and why they succeed later as the Avengers in Endgame. Where choosing the Russo brothers for a project like this was a great move considering their own work, starting out with the Winter Soldier and then Civil War that played into this film. That their direction that they took the Avengers helped into shaping what kind of movie this was, in order for a bad guy to win, where the hero must be broken into separate pieces where they cannot truly fully fight the figure, and how that figure is the actual hero for the most part of this journey. And it's hard not to agree with that image when Thanos does not really want to wear his armor for the entirety of this film, only at the beginning when he causes serious damage to the Asgardians and Thor and fights against the Hulk, which is also another great point of why this film is so great, because it doesn't want you to expect the obvious when it comes to villains like him, and sets you to learn about his journey for these stones, already starting out having two of them where he doesn't need to fight like a brute but like a person on a holy moral mission to change the universe. That we get to see who Thanos is underneath all that armor, his imperfections as a person and his goals for good reasons but the wrong executions, which is a very different course of action from the popular comic stories of Thanos where he kills half the universe just to woo Lady Death, who apparently had relationships with him, Deadpool, and in the MCU, Agatha. Where, when you look back on the history of Thanos as a character, you could see that his name came from Jim Starlin studying psychology and the concept of the death drive, or Thanatos, who is the Greek personification of death. But how they chose this new route for him to have more human attributes because of his relationship with those like Gamora, the drive it takes to cause death to save everyone else, and a villain who wasn't really trying to be a villain. And because of all of this, he has become one of the greatest villains of all of cinema, joining the likes of Darth Vader or any other classical Disney villain society remembers to this day. But anyways, when you put all of this information together, you see that Infinity War is a great classic focused on the story of a man who's determined to save the universe based on his own psychotic means, and the necessary sacrifice it takes to get there, in a very divided world that couldn't understand what that actually meant. Because when you look back on both this film and Civil War, it's about showing people that sacrifices must happen if you are to accomplish your goal, whether it's good or bad, trying to save people or avenge them as all parties come into conflict. And they do this automatically, taking place after the end credits of Ragnarok, where he causes Carnage to get the Space Stone from Loki immediately to set the tone of a force that could not be stopped even by a Norse god or raging green monster who gets soundly defeated by his more skilled opponent. That, like I said before, you begin with a powerful figure that was built up to be going toe-to-toe with the Hulk in order to show how hard this villain is going to be to defeat, and enough to the point of ending the original villain of the Avengers right then and there. The death of the Sacred Timelands Loki, setting up a new path towards life, if you know what I mean. Such a part showcases the inevitability of the situation that they will not come back from in comparison to what happens at the end that became reversible when you get contrasted to things that will not be fixed over the course of who you deal with, and a more tragic fate for characters like Thor, whose entire family is gone at that point in time, and a Hulk that doesn't want to come back anymore, unfortunately. Where that of course has to contribute to a more negative aspect and discussion of how they reach their end goals by choosing a certain path for the Hulk to never have the actual Hulk out for the time being as of this recording, and the smart professor version instead for the laughs in Endgame. However, this does work in favor of the film having heroes divided in more ways than one, broken by the actual villain who knows more than we think, studying and training for moments like this when all others would fail. Because to defeat an enemy, you must know them, and that's something we all very well know when he finally faces Tony by the end of this film, or even says outright in Endgame that the Avengers were unruly wretches. That Thanos is powerful in more ways than one, even without the stones, without his tactics, his brutal nature, and more of his skilled mind that gets what he wants. Where after that, we get Heimdall to send Hulk back to Earth as a warning of what's coming, Bruce's re-entry into Earth, and of course his character after the events of the last film, which like I said previously for the Avengers is a great way to showcase how you don't need much context from the previous films to enjoy this one. It just presents things as is, and most people are able to understand what is happening. When you get caught up with the Hulk's disappearance from Age of Ultron or the events of Civil War, as Tony explains to Banner when he's revealed to who Thanos is, which plays back into his nightmare about losing everyone because of what he caused. Where moments like this, and mostly of Tony's character in the entire film, ends up being a parallel to Thanos, as both know each other in some form and were leading to this moment as Marvel's big bad and star hero. Infinity War also establishes something that happens in Endgame, with Tony's dreaming of a kid named Morgan, continuing something that he wished to have from the nightmares of defending everybody from this grave threat, where he has to get serious about it after so many years, the contrast of what a hero wants and what he needs to do. To really quote a famous Thanos line that comes later in this very film, the hardest choices do require the strongest wills. Something you could say is the main message or theme of this entire adventure, with the decisions that both main characters have to make, surrounded by events they may not like having, with involving Steve's help after being on the run, and how the other heroes choose to hide because of those circumstances that the world put on the Avengers. The types of things that make them go into separate groups, like them being with the Mystic Arts and Wong and Doctor Strange who have the Time Stone, and then Thor who stumbles into the Guardians who rescued him, and of course the remaining Avengers who are on the run. Where you can see that each major hero is put on a different path with those other subjects to divide and conquer Thanos in the areas that he searches for the stones, like with the Black Order spread out to find the others. And this is what sets Infinity War apart from the rest of the previous Avengers films or Marvel group films, in the sense that there are major group subplots, like the Avengers on Earth, Thanos' adventure with Gamora, the Guardians teaming up with Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Strange, and Thor with Rocket and Groot. Again, as stated earlier, it shows a fractured state of the heroes having to work into smaller teams to get Thanos or try to stop him in some form, and mainly for Thanos to complete his own arc as they bicker among amongst themselves, something that kinda is used in Endgame when the film is divided into 3 separate parts of the current state of the world, the time heist, and the final battle. But how I find this one to be the superior in its nature because it is that film about Thanos, getting to know and sympathize with him in a battle against the clock as they are fighting time, quite literally in this sense. But of course, enough of that tangent, where the strategy this movie presented was great in the sense that they never wanted to go for a big scale battle. Of course, you get that in the sense of the Wakanda scene where most of them fight on the field, but it's not a huge one like what would happen in New York with Endgame, where it focuses on smaller domestic conflicts within that path, picking a stone off one by one rather than a huge fight that the previous movies did that encourages Thanos to do it himself. And what I mean by domestic conflict obviously relates to the relationship of Gamora and Thanos, focusing on flashbacks of their history and the current state of things because of what he did to their home, and how he raised her in order to save everyone else. The problems that exist in our world with population sizes and whatnot that he intends to stop because of what happened to his homeworld of Titan, or having the population with a merciful snap is actually the best solution for everyone in his mind, even if that does mean that loved ones have to die, whether it be from the snap itself or what Red Skull revealed to Thanos later on Vormir where he had to sacrifice Gamora, another death that cannot be revived as it is permanent. The soul for a soul idea that translated into the sacrifice Natasha did as well. Looking back on both halves of the story, the quest of the Infinity Stones demanded someone die permanently in order to win, where here it's shown that not even the villain can truly win without a cost with someone he loves dearly with Gamora, who never really accepted that until we actually saw him shed a tear, a vulnerability that you wouldn't expect to see in the biggest villain of this universe, but a reason to why he works so well and why he wins, because he was just willing to make this sacrifice and difficult decisions to showcase that not everything he does is for heartless reasons, but strictly filled within his heart. Most villains that preceded Thanos or required his help in exchange of the stones were just power hungry at first, wanting to take over or completely destroy society, but how Thanos just seeks to balance all aspects of life itself to continue, literally only wanting to do one thing afterwards, which is just resting on a grateful universe, and that's it. But in order to rest, he has to put into the work and has to make the hard choices like sacrificing Gamora even while he doesn't want to, yet still needs to. Same thing can be said for those like Tony or even Doctor Strange when it comes down to going into space, taking the fight to Thanos, getting people close to understand his own objectives. Like we see his role in this film is to protect the Time Stone at all costs, who used it on several occasions before to break the rules in order to win against those like Dormammu, who was willing to let Iron Man or Spider-Man die if it meant to save the universe and the Time Stone, which changes after they meet the Guardians to form a plan with his 14 million paths, where after watching films like Endgame, you can see the genius in scenes like this, where you realize his heart changed because of what he saw Tony would do, where his nonchalant attitude now turned into a harder sacrifice to give up the stone when he said he wouldn't. Big or small, every character has to commit to those difficult decisions, where it's easy to lose sight of that because of the people that they love. The film makes everyone forget what it means to be an Avenger in this moment. Everyone is just fighting their own battles, and the sacrifices are just a sad consequence of it all. And one of the biggest reasons they lost is because he lost. Thanos lost his daughter, and Quill lost his girlfriend, who made him lose his mind and let him slip. Not that it would change anything from the 14 million futures that they saw, but how it's just not a true win-win scenario for everyone involved. Yes, some may win a small battle, but then it came at a certain cost. The Black Order certainly got killed in the process of fighting in Wakanda, and Vision also had to die a couple times. I mean, at least in his case, he's still a robot so he can live as we've seen in the future, but you know. Where these deaths remind us of how it's near impossible to save everyone, even the heroes, and why Civil War was not a great event for the team and the Earth overall with what would happen. That no matter how powerful you could be, like with Thor's adventure to get Stormbreaker and his revenge, you still cannot stop what has to be done or what would be done. But at least for the heroes, you still have a forgiving and respectful villain who makes fair deals in return for his prize, like Strange giving up the stone for Tony's life, because we're in the Avengers Endgame now, where even though this man has lost something big to him, he still holds himself together, and it's why he's able to get everything he wants in the stones, making their own sacrifices with those like Vision for nothing because nobody can withstand the power of multiple stones, reversing time to kill Vision yet again to get the Mind Stone itself. Where at the end of all hope, another thing you can appreciate about Thanos is that despite wielding all this power, he only just wants to use it for this one task and he's completely done, taunting everyone else like Thor for their failure to go for the head and just snapping half of everyone away. Everything for him was done to honor his loved ones, like when he finally enters the Soul Stone to see Gamora's young self to remind him of what it did cost, in a moment that solidified Thanos as the greatest villain of all time, and nobody has denied that ever since. sense, that he enters this picture because he truly feels passionate about what he did. A victory well deserved for what he accomplished over his life, and a great failure for those like Thor for not seeing the bigger picture when he aimed for his heart instead of his head, if you get what I mean. And the ending of Infinity War, in my opinion, has to be one of the best that the MCU has to offer because of how silent it really is. Just with the montage of everyone dusting away where you don't know who's going to disappear, since they don't really die. Where the people who do are the ones who do get a greater role in the coming phases when you look back on it, where the ones who do stay are just the original cast and crew we all fell in love with, as it is their arc and legacy with Thanos that mattered the most, and how devastating it is for them watching those they friended and trained over the years to look after now crumble away in their arms for what would be forever at that point, since it is the first real time that they actually lost. And you can feel that with the silence that they are faced with nothing to say but oh god. Where the final shot of this film reminds you who this film was really about, who was the real protagonist of this adventure, who set out what he was going to do, and the villain winning this time, and resting watching the sun rise on a supposedly grateful universe. Just as he said, nothing more and nothing less, with the credits just rolling, just blank, because there's nothing really more to it. It's simple and it catches most people off guard in a positive way, where your typical hero just doesn't win anymore, accomplishing what happens in a broken world with broken people. So looking back on the film today, we can be well assured that doing this was the right call, as it was something that was needed to be done to be different while also familiar, leading to a greater adventure and sacrifice that would satisfy everyone. A reminder of what the MCU can do with its high points instead of its low failures. It's stuff like this that shows you that it's a good thing that cinematic universes like this do exist for guiding a journey that existed for so many years and build something great to share with the rest of our community, which is the most important thing to remember going into these movies. Just a great time where great villains can win and heroes should lose. And that's all there is to say. I'm all done. Goodbye.